When it says critical analysis of contemporary trends or issues, that is the thing that the topic, I guess, that you are speaking about, and how does that relate to the health and well-being of children? So development, if you're focusing on development, it does fit under health and well-being. Okay. Your analysis of information for relevance and appropriateness. So that might be in instances where you've done a survey and these are the results of your survey, which indicate this, and this is how it impacts my overall investigation. But you might then say, but I was only able to survey 15 people. So it's not a large enough amount of people to really draw any solid conclusions, but it gives you a little bit of insight. Okay, perhaps if you are into doing a case study, I think Cassidy's thinking about doing a case study, you might say that this is only one instance, this is only one individual, but other people might experience different things. Okay, so making that acknowledgement throughout your investigation is really important. And there are opportunities in your investigation to actually talk about credibility, talk about any potential bias that sources might have. So with appropriate acknowledgement of sources, so yep, identify bias or any faults. So potentially if your questions maybe weren't structured to the way that you would have liked them to be, maybe you didn't get the results that you thought you'd gotten because your questions weren't a certain way. Application of literacy and numeracy, using appropriate terminology. So for example, an example of appropriate terminology would be that you say, if you're talking about a baby during pregnancy, you would use what term? You might use prenatal. Prenatal is referring to, yep, before born. What's another word for a baby that hasn't been born yet? Fetus, okay? Yeah, so it's just something simple like that. Or you might, instead of saying fetus, you might say unborn baby. Okay, so making sure that you're being really careful about the terminology that you use, making sure that if you're talking about social development, you're not doing social and emotional, unless it is both. Okay, so just being a little bit careful, and that's what the draft is for. If I feel like there is a better alternative to a certain word, I might recommend that you change that word. Okay, and then evaluation of contemporary trends or issues related to the health and well-being of children. So pretty much overall, the conclusions that you draw from your research would be that box that I would tick. Okay, so how to break down your investigations. 2,000 words, as we know, sounds like a lot of words, but there is a bit of a guide as normal to how you would do it. So your investigation, introduction, obviously, if you would start with an introduction, it would probably be around 300 words. Can be a little bit more, can be a little bit less, depending on how much that you put in there. And there are specific things that you do need to talk about in your investigation. So those of you who are doing an investigation in any other subject, it's a very similar, if not almost identical structure. So you start with a short statement outlining the topic that you've chosen. And that's generally 100 words. So Courtney, what's your topic? Yeah. Right, so how affect children. So you might start off with some statistics about how many children are actually attending school and how many aren't. So I think it was predicted before schools were opened this week, I guess opened, it was predicted that only 30% of students would be attending school. So that's 70% of young people that aren't getting face-to-face access to their education. So you might start off with a statistic like that. You might start off with in January of 2020, a pandemic opened out and this is how many people are affected, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you would start off with some relevant information that just it leads you into your topic, and then you would find some information that makes it relevant to children if it's not already relevant. Because 100 words is probably 3 or 4 sentences. It's not many words, all right, because it is a short statement, but it's a quick way to grab the reader's attention, quick way to make it relevant and introduce what you're going to be talking about. You're not introducing your investigation question, you're introducing the topic. Okay, the second thing is an outline of the scope of your investigation. So the scope is a couple of different things, and it's generally 100 words as well. So this might be some relevant definitions. So what are some examples people can think of? Some definitions that you might need to clarify, or some things in your investigation that you need to clarify. So what are you focusing on, Cassidy? Yeah, so auditory processing disorder is this. Yeah. You might define that. You might, in this part, put in that my investigation is focusing on the ages of 3 to 5, or from 0 to 2. Okay, if you have chosen a specific age range, you might put that in there. You might even decide that this will focus from 0 to 8. Okay, you might even put that in. Somebody's doing continued domestic abuse. Who's that? Caitlin. Okay, so you would then use this as an opportunity to explain what does continued domestic abuse mean, and how does that differ from just domestic abuse. So you would talk about how it's continuous, obviously it's in the name, but you would need to put that in there. Any other examples that people can come up with? Postpartum depression, yeah, so you might have some information in there about what that is, if you can find anything about that. Okay, so that is an opportunity for you to put in definitions. Now the scope part is where you put in your research question or a hypothesis if you've chosen one. All right, generally there's a bit of lead into it. You don't just go plonk. You might say, you know, my investigation question is blah, 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 or all of these questions or topics that you have has led to the investigation question to be, or I predict that after my investigation, this is the result that I will get, whatever you've chosen to do. All right, and generally I recommend that you put that like in the middle with italics. You might even do quotations if you want to. All right, make it a bigger font. All right, make that focus question a bit bigger than everything else, not your research question. And then you would have your focus questions. So leading into that, you might say, to be able to come to a conclusion from my investigation, I will break it into these focus questions. Dot points. Okay? Don't just put them in a paragraph. Have them as dot points. Make them very clear of the topic questions that you've chosen. And that should be, again, 100 words, only 3 or 4 sentences. All right? Very quick. Oh no, it's gone. Okay, sorry. So your methodology, again, 100 words. Is it? Well, it's a bit slow. I'm on methodology. Tell me when. No? No. My face is frozen. Oh, joy. Ooh, is it a good face? No. No? All right, maybe I'll just talk about it then, and hopefully it won't freeze. So methodology is talking about how you are going to conduct your investigation, or how you have conducted your investigation. Okay, so you talk about the primary sources that you've chosen, okay, who they are, why are they a credible source, okay, pardon me, why have you chosen them as a primary source? So perhaps if you've done pardon me again, if you've done a survey, why have you chosen to survey that particular group of people? Okay, it's distracting for me. Why have you chosen to survey those particular people, interview those particular people? This is then your opportunity to identify any bias, all right, or any faults in your research. So you might say, in my survey, I only surveyed 15 people. This might indicate that my results are not, I'm struggling for words right now, but this is your opportunity to identify that. You don't talk about it later in your investigation, you identify it first. Okay. If you have struggled to find a primary source, that's where you identify it. You say, I interviewed so many people, this person, this person, this person, or tried to get them to interview, was unsuccessful, and I do not have any primary sources for my investigation. But I have then gone above and beyond with my secondary sources, okay? And then you talk about your secondary sources. So you've used government sites. You might even indicate which ones in particular, if they have been a large source for you. Perhaps you found statistics from the Bureau of Statistics, okay? National websites or organisations or whatever, okay? That's where you might identify that. And you would say that they're all national, they're all updated, there's no real bias there. Maybe if they're medical sites, okay? If you've got things like newspaper articles, there might be some potential bias in those as well, okay? Because yes, there would be some information backing up a lot of the statements, but somebody is putting in their opinion in that article, okay? Their opinion might be coming through and it might lead you to believe this. So if you're talking about socioeconomic status at all, or if you're talking about disadvantage, you have to consider that the author themselves comes from a specific socioeconomic group, which would lead them to have bias, whether that's middle, lower, upper. They might have certain education, which might indicate them to have some bias. And then, you know, they might have a range of different things that contribute to their opinion, their values, and that might be coming through in the article. So if you find that bias, it's just something worth popping in there, okay, that you've thought about the potential bias of that particular article. What else? The methods that you use to gather these, so whether it was an email interview, phone interview, what are some survey platforms that you'll use? SurveyMonkey, Google Forms. What else is other people doing it? I might talk about case study at all. How did you do that? Did you take notes? Did you do observations? If you did observations, that is technically taking notes. So how did you gather information? How you went about the investigation? Yeah, okay. So that's your introduction. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily start with. Okay, you might have heard it before that sometimes you actually leave your introduction to the end because you don't know what you're going to talk about until you've actually talked about it. Okay, and because you haven't finished your investigating, I wouldn't expect you to write a lot of this. Okay, the only thing that I would probably encourage you to do would just be the short statement. Okay, because you know what you want to look into and you probably maybe found some information already that might fit into that part. But I'm not expecting you to write your scope or your methodology until you've actually completed your research. All right. Oh, I just have slides for all of these. So an example of a short statement. Okay. Oh, okay. So you need to put in there somewhere the area of study that you have chosen, okay, and you need to give maybe a sentence as why that's relevant. So for some of you, I might have led you in a different direction in terms of your area of study. You might have identified it as something and I might have pushed you in a different direction. It's important that you put a sentence in there sort of explaining why it's in that area of study. So that could fit in your short statement, but it could also fit in your scope, your area where you talk about your area of study. So an example of this investigation related to socio-cultural influences as it explores the roles of toys in the development of personal gender and group identity of children. A lot of those words were taken directly from the SACE outline in the areas of study. So that PowerPoint that we had way back when, where we looked at the individual areas of study and it had dot points of examples, use those words, okay? If you can see where your topic fits into that area of study, plug in those words, okay? I think there's sentence starters in your planning book as well. We talked about that. All right, an example of scope of study. This investigation focuses solely on the influence of children's toys. Okay, so they're not looking at anything else, they're looking at toys. And then gender stereotypical toys are defined, so they put a definition, as an overgeneralization of characteristics, differences, and attributes based on certain genders, such as pink for girls and blue for boys. So they put an example in there as well to clarify that. Okay, they might have even gone further in this example to actually indicate the difference between gender and sex. So can anybody in the online tell me what the difference is? What is gender? Yeah, what you define yourself as? So even some examples of so go to say like girl boy, we say girl boy gender. Yeah. What's sex? What do you think of? Like if you think of biological medical terms, what are those? Male and female. Okay, so we have boy and girl. A doctor would never really say this is a 20-year-old boy or a 20-year-old girl. It's a 20-year-old male, 20-year-old female, and that's exactly it. But so your sex, they in this example for a definition, they might say that sex is male, female. It's the medical term that dictates your reproductive organs, because that is what dictates what a male and what a female is, your reproductive organs. Gender is a social construct of how you are expected to act, behave, values that you have based on your reproductive organs. Okay? They might have taken that further and put in that definition if they had words for it. Okay? And then they've gone straight into their research questions. So this example, they've put the little thing as, what are these called? Wait, no, that's the double ones. What are these ones called? Italics? Yeah, thank you. I don't know. I should know, but I don't. All right. But you could make it italic and have it tilting on the side. They've made it a different color. They've made it bigger. All right, and it's just smack bang in there. Okay, and they have said the aim is to determine. We might say the aim of this investigation is to determine to what extent do gender stereotypical toys negatively impact a child's development. Okay, bang. Following focus questions that will guide discussion. Oh, bang. All right, it's that simple. Smack it in there. All right, so you might even do that already. You might already do your scope because you've got your focus questions. All right, so your methodology is where you might leave it to the very end because you might not know what you do. All right, so an example of a methodology. This investigation utilised a variety of primary and secondary resources. While secondary sources such as credible newspaper articles, websites, radio segments, ebooks, and previous studies provided factual information, the interviews delved into personal perspectives and opinions that highlighted a range of viewpoints. So, right there, they've identified a bunch of different secondary sources. Okay, because you can get stuff from the radio, you can get podcasts. Triple J is a really good podcast to use as well with lots of different information. What are they called? Peer-reviewed studies. If you're looking at those from Google Scholar, you can put them in there as well. But then what's really interesting is they've then said these interviews have delved into personal perspectives and outlined a range of viewpoints. So they've already identified that there will be some personal perspectives in there. There are some personal biases that have come through, but they've also provided a range of viewpoints. So they haven't just done one interview and gotten one opinion. They might have done a couple that have given a couple of different viewpoints, which makes them really valid because then you can actually talk about the different viewpoints. You're getting more coverage, and they've identified that. Okay, what else have they said? A survey of 20 parents of young children with a strong vested interest in the topic potentially led to biased responses, okay? Because maybe you send out surveys to a bunch of different people and only the people that care or are interested in that topic have done it, and maybe the 50 other people haven't done it. Okay, so they might have identified some bias in their survey. A more balanced perspective was gained through interviewing 8 respected health and educational professionals. This person is very fortunate to have 8. And by visiting toy stores to assess aisle arrangement. So they've actually gone to certain toy stores and they've interviewed like managers of, say, Toys R Us. Okay, so that would have been one of their interviews. A challenge was encountered in attempt to gain permission to conduct an observational experiment on kindergarten children, yet through extensive efforts, permission was granted, resulting in, okay, so you won't be able to do that, but this particular person might have had female toy, well, yeah, sorry, not female toys, girl toys and boy toys, and they might have had gender neutral toys, and they might have just watched to see how the children behave based on those toys, okay? So that's something that they've done. What else? All right, So, and then you do your discussion. So when you do your investigation discussion, this is the biggest part. You obviously break it off into your focus questions, and you only want to focus on your one question at a time. Okay, you don't want to be bouncing up and down stuff that's relevant to your third focus question. You don't want to be talking about perhaps in your first focus question, because you might be repeating yourself a little bit. So this is where you maybe need to revisit your focus questions and just think about their structure. You might even be writing your body of your investigation, and you might think that, okay, well, my second focus question should actually be at the top. Maybe you want to talk about that particular one first. Okay, so making sure that it actually has a flow and it leads the focus question, first focus question might lead into the second one, which might lead into the third one, which might lead to your conclusion. Some of your focus questions might be completely different and they might not have anything to do with each other, all right, which is fine also, all right, but making sure that while you're writing your investigation, having in the back of your mind an idea of, is this flowing from what I've just talked about? Does it make sense from what I've just talked about? All right, you will just read through and get through it. So, yeah, order of your focus questions, subheadings, fine. Address and analyse each aspect of the issue to demonstrate your knowledge and deep understanding of the issue from your research. Continue to make connections of how it is relevant to children's health and well-being as best as you can. Although you want to keep it relevant to your focus question, if you see an opportunity to make it relevant to your overall question, feel free to do that as well. But just keep in mind that you can do that in your conclusion. Okay, so you might want to say, this then leads me to believe that blah, blah, blah in relation to my research question, but it's a really, really good opportunity to actually do that in your conclusion and say that my research found this, which means this, which relates to my question. Bang. Okay, so I would leave most of that for your conclusion. Critically analyse the merits of each aspect to determine whether or not they prove your original hypothesis or whether or not they sufficiently address your research questions. That's what I just said. You can do that to an extent, but try not to overdo it so that it does leave you opportunities to talk about it in your conclusion. So I'll show you an exemplar in a minute. Evaluating evidence. So when writing academically, it's important to demonstrate your ability to gather information and evaluate it. All right, so that's me talking about way back when, where you don't just put information in your investigation and willy-nilly it's done. You've got to do some sort of analysis. You've got to discuss what this means, whether you're discussing what it means for a socioeconomic group, maybe you're discussing what it means for 2020 versus 2015. You've got to do some sort of analysis on that. And how is it relevant? What does it mean? Most students will begin writing their investigation without conducting research and establishing suitable evidence for their issue. I do have an exemplar that I can put up of a student that's done this. And that's when they haven't really found proper definitions. They've literally just gone and written what they've got in their head. Because sometimes we do know information and we know that it's accurate, but you need to reference it. All right, and there's an example of a student that has sort of taken information that they know to be true, or at least has personal bias on the issue, and have just put it in there. All right, so I'll show you that example. As much as it is important to conduct research and find information and evidence to support conclusions you make, you must evaluate evidence. So yeah, that's like critical analysis again. Once you've conducted your research, you'll need to put it in your investigation under appropriate headings. Obvious. You can do this by quoting what has been said. All right, so you can use direct quotes. You can do this from like websites. You don't have to only do this from interviews. Okay, you can directly quote things from, say, like a peer-reviewed article where somebody's written something. You can use a direct quote if you feel like it's relevant. Don't have your whole investigation full of direct quotes, okay? Because you're probably going to lose some marks there because it's not showing that evaluating that critical analysis, okay? So you try as best as you can to say, this website indicates this fact, or whoever your article, peer-reviewed article has been written by, let's just say it's the last name's Taylor. So T. Taylor, in his research of blah, 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 indicates this. This then means this, okay? You can use a direct quote
if you need to, but try not to do it and try to paraphrase as best as you can. All right, but you can use direct quotes. You can present research using visual charts and diagrams, but do not just put these in without discussing them. I'll show you some examples of somebody doing that as well, and how you can actually use your information and discuss them. Always acknowledge your sources, which is obvious. 2 options. Oh gosh, pardon me. Footnote referencing. I personally prefer footnote referencing, especially in a large body of work, because it helps with your word count. Okay, because if you do in-text referencing, you have to add all of them up and then take them out. So I would recommend, as you're writing it, do footnotes so that you can keep track of your references. And if you really, really like doing in-text referencing, do it at the very end. Okay, so once you've got all of your footnotes, you know what they are, you can then actually put in your in-text reference if you prefer to do that, and you know what your word count is, and that way you're not spending a lot of time doing it that way. Yeah, if you would you want to flick that to me through email, and I can put it up on Daymat for everyone. That'd be a great website to do that, but that's just an option. So happy for you to in-text reference, happy for you to footnote, but I just don't want to waste your time counting words because that can be annoying. All right. So using visuals, photos, use photos. If you can use photos, do. It'll save you words and it'll make your ideas easier to understand. If you're trying to perhaps describe physical traits or health implications, it can chew up a lot of words and you might just say refer to image, blah, blah, blah. Okay, try to use pictures. Graphs, obviously, so like a pie graph or a bar graph, what other graphs are there, a line graph, whatever it might be, to illustrate what you're talking about. Make sure that they are put, when you've got your investigation, try to put the graphs or pictures next to what you're talking about. Sometimes you can be reading an investigation and the picture or the graph will be down the bottom, but you're actually talking about it up the top. Do try to make sure that it is close to what you're talking about so it's easier for the reader to follow. It's not necessarily something that you might get downgraded for, but in terms of your literacy and numeracy, it is better if it's more up there, it's more relevant, it's easier to follow, stuff like that. I've got some examples of that as well. What else? Primary data. So if you're doing a survey, you can use your graphs and stuff like that. If you're doing an interview, you can use quotes. Key findings. Do not put in data where it visual analyzing. Oh, so you don't put it in there without actually analyzing it. Yeah. Stupid. All right, picture. All right, so this is just a couple of different ways that you can actually put in your data if you have done surveys or stuff like that. I love pie graphs for some reason. What it is, I just find them really, really easy to understand. Okay, an example of the top left corner where they've put in a number is an opportunity for perhaps you to put in a picture of a really big statistic that you found out. All right, you still want to use that statistic in your written word, but it might be, if that's a really big point that you want to emphasis, put it in there as a picture and see if it works. If it doesn't work, I'll let you know and we'll get rid of it. Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to talk to you about when you do. So just have a quick look at these examples of different ways to represent data and just have a think about what do they have that help them easy to interpret. What do they have make them easy to understand? We don't necessarily know what they're about. I can't remember what website I got this from. Just think about it and go back. I'm just going to check. Oh, yeah, no, sorry, I just got out of it. There we go. I'm not on that. That's all right. True. All right.
I think of, yeah, one thing that everything's done. You can see what I've got. Pardon? No one replied, nobody cares. That's all right. So I am going to. Oh no, Jessie. Hi Jessie, sorry I didn't admit you. I didn't hear you were waiting. Just join. I got a thumbs up from Alex. Yep, I can see Alex's thumbs up. All right, so all right, I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick someone from home. I'm going to pick Kelly. Kelly, can you I'm going to unmute you. Don't unmute yourself. Shh, everyone listen. Okay, Kelly, what's one thing that you can see in these graphs that make them easy to understand?
The colours.
Colours, great, absolutely great point. Okay, I'm gonna mute you now. Okay, so the colours, all right. So don't just have different types of grey in your investigation. Utilise colours to make the information come through. Really great one, Kelly. I'm going to now pick on Mackenzie. Mackenzie, I've just unmuted you. What is something else that you can see that makes it easy to understand?
They're spread apart.
Sorry?
They're spread apart.
They're spread apart. Okay, yeah. There's maybe if we look at the what are they called, the bar graphs, they've got gaps in them, but also they're not all stuck together. There are generally separated, but in your investigation, you wouldn't have data this close to each other. You would have it more spread out. So I'm now going to mute you. Thank you. Let's have somebody in the classroom. Percentages. Thank you, Caitlin. All right, so they've got the percentages in there. So they're not just coloured, oopsie, where'd it go? They're not just coloured bits, all right? They've actually given us the percentage as well. So when you do produce graphs or something like that, Brianna, I'm not really appreciating your head being on the table. Thank you, we're all tired, all right? All right, so do make sure that you include your percentages, whether you have them on the outside of the graph, like this one here, whether you have them on the inside. You might even have a key on the side that then has the colour and the percentage, so perhaps something like this. All right, somebody else. Sarah, anything else? Yeah. Yep, specific percentage rather than just having parts of it. All right, that's very good. Somebody else. How do we know what each graph is about? Really? Titles, all right? They have titles. They tell us what the information is. They have a y and an x axis, okay? And they've indicated, let me just blow it up again. They've indicated what the x and y axis is. They've got a key, they've got a coloured key, okay? All of those different things. So now let's do this one. What's wrong with it? I'm going to pick on someone online. I'm going to pick, who do I have next? Molly. I'm going to unmute Molly. What's wrong with these graphs?
They're like hard to understand because they're all like bunched together and the numbers.
Yeah, they're hard to understand. If we look at this one on the left, lots of numbers that are just sort of crammed into each other, and it's really hard to sort of figure out what's what, especially if we look at this orange one that's just 1%. All right, very difficult. So thanks, Molly. I'm going to mute you now. All right, let's have somebody in the class. Courtney, why not? What doesn't it have that makes it hard to understand? There's no title. I don't know what this data means. All right, pretty simple. Somebody else. Yeah, they've used two of the same colours in different areas. So, for example, there's a green here that says 23%, but there's also a green here that says 5%. But we don't know what each one is representing. Very good. All right. So, obviously, this one on the right doesn't have a title. It doesn't have a key. But something that I wanted to point out is that because all of these bits are in particular the 6 and the 10, quite small. I'll put the numbers on the outside. All right. If you see an opportunity to put the numbers on the inside, please do. Otherwise, outside is a really good alternative and it makes information really easy to understand. Okay, back to PowerPoint. So some different ways to represent data. Even if you found data from another website that you can use, still use it writing it, but you can still put in visual representations of it. If they've got a graph somewhere, you can screenshot it, put it in your investigation. You just have to reference it. All right, you can use data from other websites. So use tables, whether if you need to, you can use pie graphs, give it a relevant title. The title could be the survey question that you use. So if you found certain results for a particular question. Are we doing TikToks? What's going on? Let's have a stretch. That's good. How are we going for time? Not well. All right. Place it in the paragraph which you are referring to the data. Okay, so don't have your information willy-nilly anywhere. Make sure it's relevant. How much time do I have? Damn. That's all right. I don't think I have too much to go. You're not supposed to be online for more than 50 minutes. Because it's too much for your brain, apparently. All right, anyway. Did somebody leave or did somebody come in? Okay, that's all right. Anyway, back to me. All right, so graphs, photographs, figures. So when you do put in data as a graph, or if you've used a photo or if you've used a table, make sure that you label it. Make sure that it has a relevant title. Make sure that you're utilizing figure 1 or figure 2 for, say, graphs and diagrams. If you're using an image, use image 1 or image 2, okay? Do not use, we talked about color. Have an appropriate key that makes things easy to understand, because the easier it is to understand, it helps with that flow that we were talking about earlier. Good. All right. So some examples that you can look at in your own time of how to label your specific data, okay, that you choose to use. All right, almost there. Conclusion. The conclusion of your investigation needs to be longer than 1 paragraph. Okay, it does. I have recommended 200 to 400 words. If you think about 400 words in 1 paragraph, really big. All right, so try to find opportunities to break it up, whether it's 2 paragraphs, because you will find that you are talking about some different things in your conclusion. So whether that be the first paragraph you're talking about those conclusions that you found out from each focus question that we talked about before, and then your final paragraph might be, this is my overall conclusion, overall answer to my question, my overall, did I prove my hypothesis or did it not, blah, blah, blah. All right, so your one recommendation is to aim for at least 300 words. All right, it needs to be strong, as this is the last thing the marker will read. The conclusion is a summary. It needs to sum up your main ideas and findings. In the opening paragraph, you will need to make reference to keywords or concepts. State clearly, revisit your overall research question and then answer it, I guess. All right, here's another one. But I'm going to give you an exemplar to look at. Things to avoid, you can look at that in your own time. Referencing some examples there. The link that I've put in, I'm going to quickly click on. It's going to work. It's a UniSA website, and the reason I put it in there is because I went to UniSA and I found this website to be very useful. So I'll quickly go through it. If you don't know how to reference something, this is where you can go and it will show you how to do it. So if it's print, I doubt it'll be print, but if you do find a printed article, like a newspaper article, click on print and you might click on newspaper article and it'll tell you how to do it. If you have listened to a podcast or a YouTube video that would be in sound and visual, you are allowed to use YouTube videos or 60 minutes, stuff like that, all right? And electronic can be any mode that you found electronic. So let's just, for example, click on electronic. All right, if you found a blog, there you can click on blog and it will tell you how to reference a blog. Bureau of Statistics, it tells you how to reference that. An ebook, In email, if you have emailed someone, you can reference an email. A journal article, you can tells you how to reference it. An online newspaper article, perhaps you did get it from the Australian newspaper, but you actually got it from online. It tells you how to reference that. Okay, so please use this as a guide on how to do your referencing. It is really, really useful if you are not confident in doing that. Okay, so now that's done. You can revisit that PowerPoint at any time. I don't think I've posted it yet though. What have I got here? I think that's the PowerPoint. All right. No, this is the exemplar. I have put your exemplar in there. I put in the A. So what I'll do also is I will put in the C, and we're not going to go through it today, but you might even now for the rest of the lesson, you've got two options. All right, you can go through the exemplars, the A exemplar, and I'll quickly post the C exemplar, and you can see the difference. You can have a look at how they've done their structure, introduction, scope, methodology, their first question, how they've used visual data, all right, they've perhaps done their reference list, okay, because they've referenced their secondary sources and their primary sources differently. So have a look through that, and then you can have a look at the C. The second option is for you to continue your research, all right, whether that be finding people to call, finding people to email, working on survey questions, doing secondary resources. I know that primary sources are important, and I have put a lot of emphasis on your primary sources, but your secondary sources are just as important. Please make sure that you are making efforts to find secondary sources. Who can remember what a good amount of secondary resources is in terms of numbers? 10. 10 is a really healthy amount of resources, okay? It's a good amount. If you are struggling to get to 10, don't panic. If they are really good websites, then that'll be fine, okay? People that are online, just if you have any questions or concerns, can you please unmute yourself now before I end the lesson? I don't know, I think everybody seems okay. So what I want to do now is I want to leave you up to your own devices. I am going to put up that C example. Alex, what I want to do with you is I would like to end this lesson, and in about 10 minutes, I'd like you to rejoin, and I want to have a chat with you, okay? All right, so I am going to stop this lesson.